Came from Mr. Hayes.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairperson. And firstly, can I sincerely congratulate Mrs. Alessandra on her report and all of the 34 recommendations that she has set out in her report. I agree with all of them, and I think it's a very comprehensive response to the Court's report. And I'll come back to some of her recommendations in a moment, if I may, Chairperson. Can I also thank especially the Court for this special report? I think it is long overdue and very timely indeed that we debate and discuss these issues because this was Europe's moment of crisis, and especially in countries like my own, which effectively saw a 20% reduction in GDP over the course of 5 years, an extraordinary adjustment programme that the Irish people had to put up with. But we have come through that, thankfully, on the other side, and the country is growing. We need to learn the mistakes that were made throughout this process. And I think the Court's special report that was published earlier this year sets out those mistakes clearly. The report has said very clearly that the Commission was totally unprepared for this, that the lead-up period in assessing the risks member state by member state was not there. We recognise that this was a learning experience, that we were in uncharted territory where effectively a small number of member states were insolvent and the tools of European support had to be used for the purposes of bailing them out effectively. But I think what is very interesting about this report is the words used by the Court of Auditors in respect of the Commission's record keeping, which they describe as cumbersome, the economic forecasting, which they describe as limited, and on the question of key documents, key documents that they looked for at the time, the Court looked for, were not there, and I think the Commission needs to give account, be accountable for that, as to why that documentation was not there to the Court at the moments when it was looked for. The report also deals with this kind of one-size-fits-all approach to adjustment programmes and the fact that many of the recommendations did not take into account special national circumstances. This is the crucial issue because, as I said yesterday in my own report, we are not dealing here with the same economy throughout each of the member states. Each different member state has different strengths and weaknesses and has a different economic model. And if we're trying to get convergence, we have to respect the fact that member state by member state has a unique economic characteristics. And that was not taken into account, in my humble opinion, when it comes to the designing of these programmes. The case of Hungary was given as an example. In the initial bailout period, it had 60 unique conditions, recommendations. In the case of my own country and Portugal, we had about 400. So there was not a fair, universal approach by the Commission to the design of these programmes, which is something that we need to learn a lot about. One crucial issue for Ireland, Chairperson, if I may indulge the committee, is the ongoing dispute concerning the failure to agree with two attempts by two Irish governments to impose losses on senior bondholders in two defunct zombie banks. That issue remains an issue for all Irish people. I'm referring to the Anglo-Irish Bank and Irish Nationwide, which at the time were totally bankrupt, totally defunct, but had losses 8 times the amount of capital that they had put in place. Now, I think it is crucial that the Court of Auditors has said in its own report the fact that when they looked for documentation from the ECB in terms of this particular issue, there was no documentation or they couldn't find it. We need to have accountability on that. I have raised this issue with President Draghi during opportunities during the monetary dialogue, but the replies are not sufficient. And I think the watchdog function of the Court of Auditors, which is a crucial function within the European Union architecture, needs to call this out, as it has quite correctly in this report. And still, to this day, we do not have a concrete answer, a sufficiently comprehensive answer to that issue. Where do we go next? I think Mrs. Alessandra's report is very comprehensive, as I said. Now, there's three final issues I'd like to highlight. One, into the future, we need to have an auditing system, not at the end of the event, but as we go through the event. Because, of course, money through the various funding mechanisms, the two funding mechanisms that we've used in the financial crisis, are spent and expended as we go. So it seems to me that the court would be in a much better position if it had analysed the expenditure regime as we went through the procedure, rather than leaving it to some years after the event. Secondly, as Mrs. Alessandra has said in her report, the key issue of parliamentary supervision, and this is an issue that I know this committee, Econ and other colleagues in other committees have raised. We now have, thankfully, a financial assistance working group, which is made up of a variety of members under the supervision of Econ. But that parliamentary scrutiny, control, observation was not there at the time. And I think as European citizens who we represent in this Parliament, that is an issue that has to be flagged up. And I think the other fundamental question that needs to be asked, what have we done differently? I think it is the case that into the future the ECB will not be part of a Troika programme. I think they've made that pretty obvious and clear. But we need to go through especially what is the expertise we need within the Commission. And can I make one final point to the Commission? I am fed up, quite frankly, as a country that has gone through all of this, has come out the other end with extraordinary resilience on the part of our people. I am fed up listening to the continuous negative assessments by some people in the Commission about my country's record of in terms of the economic transformation. It's as if the Commission, in recognising success at one level, directly then go and having to make negative comments as a counterbalance to what they say. You know, I really think they have to get over themselves on this issue. You know, countries have made extraordinary sacrifices. We have thankfully come out the other end. There needs to be much greater balance, in my view, in the Commission's assessment of that, rather than the kind of nitpicking approach that often outlies their assessment. And I think insofar as the Court's report that we're discussing today has helped us to engender more interest and debate in this question, we need to continually come back to this question and look for accountability from the Commission on a whole range of issues that surround this very dark period in European history. Thank you, Chairperson.